Now, welcome all of you. There's a young audience, so it's quite nice actually. Thank you for being here. I mean, you must be students, I guess, and part of the dealing with the construction economy, so you must have used the MOOC on the BIM. I guess you have heard about it. Thank you very much, Catherine. This is a workshop where we're going to talk about a workshop, and it's going to be more complicated for me. We're going to talk about a virtual workshop now. So it's very complex. We're going to talk about BIM virtual workshop called the ABV, developed in a work group where we've got our 3 guests as members at the initiative of Christian Herrera, who's on my right here, and who originated the project and who was the president of the Market and Construction Commission of the FIB, with a large number of participants in all the different sectors of the construction sector, amongst whom Christophe Marais, a construction economist. I mean, he's obviously here at home. I mean, even if you're all at home, he's R&D and Tech Vice President, Deputy Vice President of Intech. So we're going to give him a round of applause, shall we? And then Jacques Montel, who has his own company called Ideal, who's a specialist of the locksmith activity. Don't hesitate to intervene, to raise your hands. As we're talking about BIM, there's a digital dimension, and in the digital dimension there's also a participatory dimension, and I think a debate is a successful debate when there's an exchange. Other than that, I mean, it's one way down. So don't hesitate to take part. And I'm going to let you take the floor. Christian, first of all, the BIM, without playing on work, you have re-BIMized, you've used the BIM method on an existing construction, about 30 social estate flats, and you started ex nihilo with a BIM. I mean, how... Without the BIM element, I mean, how would we work? So it's a working group with a virtual dimension attached to it. So it's of interest to us, as this is the future, and the future is present here for us to do know-how transfer and for us to take us through your project. So the project started at the end of 2015. It took about 6 months to put up, and it started in January 2016, when we launch a BIM session, when we want to enjoy the totality of the BIM design, implementation, and the 10-year guarantee. I mean, it takes you a long time before we had the return. So the P10B, I submitted a project to them saying, instead of designing it, we're going to do it virtually, though. We're going to proceed to BIM without any design, without building it. So we take an existing workshop, 30 flats in La Rochelle, and we're going to re-BIM it. So you imagine that you look for a location, you go for the social estate people. Yes, we had all the DE elements, and we started the building from the design and so on. So you started with this idea, which welcomed this. How was it greeted? Very positively.
Assembler des acteurs.
The idea was basically to bring all the actors and stakeholders together by means of and under the aegis of professional organizations. Because it's concretely, it was going to be a project carried by the professional organizations, and there were quite a few of them. We were very numerous. In fact, nearly the whole panel of them, in fact, all the participants of the chain, some of which you can see projected on the slide, including Christophe Marais and Jacques Montel. And how many people apart from that would you say were present? Well, we'll see it on the further slide, actually. 2 more, I believe, yes.
Donc je synthétise en 2 secondes, c'est quand même assez génial. Vous voyez un bâtiment.
That's the quite brilliant approach, in fact. You could just basically spot any kind of building and you wanted to BIMize this construction technique by imagining them virtually as a set of 30, say, social housings, a set of 30 social housings, and it would enable you, of course, to win a lot of time. Of course, and said in passing, there's a method which can be applied to any other case study, basically. You take your field work from the previous month and you try to project it in a BIM kind of context. So you can make a virtual projection of virtually anything. Now, when we launched this project, we were, let me remind you, end 2015, again, beginning of 2016, and we wondered whether we might upgrade that version to a BIM level 2. And then we wondered whether we had all the necessary software and whether it would be made sufficiently interoperable. So part of the project's objective was to make sure that in real life, basically, you don't show idealistic images. You come to see the architects and see what their problems, their down-to-earth problems may be, and gradually you want to bring that state-of-the-art into the real-life situation using the nowadays BIM, basically. And the problem usually doesn't lie in the software, it's in the human factor. So the project followed more or less the following scheme, basically. You had to begin with, you had to set up a team that would be operational and working on the project. Then you have to choose the reference program. We decided to concentrate on La Rochelle, that part of France and Brittany more specifically. Then you have to give yourself a set of precise prescriptions, basically, with a BIM convention that needs also to be developed. And then you set up a collaborative process for of the level of BIM second level, and make sure that all the collaborative tools are available to you. So all the actors, basically, that imply the level 2 of BIM means that all the collaborators could communicate on the platform. That's right. And we also had an acoustic dimension which wasn't directly integrated in the BIM project, for example. That was part of the challenges. So the upgrading had to take place as we went, basically. So one shouldn't be inhibited or shying off from adding up little add-ons, basically, to this BIM virtual conventional project. Yes, exactly, depending on the know-how of all the participants and of the necessary adjustments of the project. Then you have to carry out a simulation with a virtual experimentation of this BIM on this very operation, and then you have to compare the different approaches with the BIM and excluding BIM approaches, that is to say, and then you have to evidence the possible breaks or difficulties and obstacles to overtake, but also make sure that you can underline and stress the potential benefits and added values thanks to the use of the BIM, like quality, efficiency, usually time gain, and so on. So the project was basically conceived for about 9 months, and then it was realized over the same, more or less the same amount of time, 9 months, and it was just finished at the beginning of the spring season right now. That's right. And right now we're just in the process of making some marketing films and video supports, but the project is in itself finished. Yes, and that's where Christophe comes into play. I think Christophe Marais as well as Jacques Montagne will take us a little more about the phase of the project that they were in charge of, that is to say the Intec. That's true. So we were altogether, we were a group of 130 people, in fact, and as we went along, this project drew more and more collaborators into its vortex, as it often happens. And so among the 130 actors of the project, 44 of them were operationals. There were some observers, some editors, some industrial actors, of course. And these editors were very helpful, I must say, all along the development. In the counseling sense, if you like, they didn't systematically sell anything to us or on our behalf, but they were very supportive. Is that a première, would you say, in France, to adopt that sort of BIM-like approach in order to BIMize a project or an existing function. Well, it was certainly a premiere, not only in France, but in Europe, on the planet Earth, and even in our solar system, I would say, because at the end of the day, the Luxembourgish teams have been copying us or emulating us after we got started. But as it often happens, a company can take in its own trail so many partners, because the benefits of such a collaborative project are usually falling off quite fast all around them and spreading fast. Okay, and how did the HLM, so Social Housing Office, react when they saw that some of their own processes were basically transformed and appropriated by yourselves perhaps in a quite smart and efficient way too? Yes, we'll give you some examples of two actors in the course of this panel, but I think first and foremost, the actors that took part in the BIM stayed and remained on board of the BIM, and they're still with us. And then the other companies that intervened in the actual implementation or realization of the works were also rendered accountable for their own objectives, because we don't do BIM for the sake of BIM, basically. We have to stay and remain aware of what's the actual concrete end of the project. So, as you said before, there was a number of teams that needed to be set up, and so what criteria did you use in order to generate those virtual simulations, and what work groups, what type of profiles did you find within your working groups? So we had to turn to all sorts of professional organizations who could come up with available BIM profiles. They had to be BIM or not. That was the first criteria. The second criteria would have been whether they were dynamic and entrepreneurial people. Third criteria would be that they were available, of course. And then a fourth criteria would be possibly sheer social affinities, the fact that we got along, basically. We felt like working together. Okay, Christophe Marais, now you're in charge of research and development, and you're quality of vice president, deputy vice president, sorry, for Antec. So what did you find particularly seductive in this project among your criteria grid of motivation, basically? Well, I would say it was quite straightforward. We all speak a lot about BIM, but we have few opportunities, in fact, to actually intervene on one of those operations. After all, the stakes were to study and analyze the processes rather than actually project oneself in the building process of the on-the-field effective real construction site. So that was an iterative process, and we had to think out various solutions or leads. Basically, I think that the first attitude to have when you go for a BIM project is to remain humble, because you never know what swerving way it's going to follow at the end of the day. And we do whatever's in our capacity, knowing well that we're going to have to adjust and adapt to the situation, possibly unpredictably. So it's like working in a virtual workshop, experimenting as much as possible. And as I'm in charge of the R&D for Antec, part of the interest was also to bring forward all the interactive experimentation that I could share from my previous experience, and I would have perhaps doubted my capacity to do so in another more realistic on-the-field project rather than a BIM dimensioned geared one. Okay, so this collaborative concept is, I think, the core characteristic of the BIM, isn't it? Yes. We had one project which was developed in the framework of the workshop, and Christophe also asked us to give some feedback to our respective professional organizations, which made it difficult Well, in the case of the specific work, Antec work group, I introduced them with the platform that we were about to develop and asked them what sort of mock-up they thought we could develop. So you had to adopt a rather didactical and pedagogical attitude in a way within your own professional corporations. Yes, I suppose you could say so. In the context of the GT BIM, we had to open up on our own working methods, and I'd always considered myself being a truly experienced sort of professional in the field of BIM projects, and I realized that I wasn't at all, and we each had our own fortes and interesting experiences with a lot of interrogation points and doubts as well. So it was the sheer exchange of these impressions was, of course, fruitful and constructive. And how did you try to BIMize then this virtual process of construction and from then forth? Well, our pluridisciplinary team, which had been initially set up, started to work on a convention, and then we cut and pasted, in fact, a convention that had just been issued on a similar subject, and then we put it on aside. In fact, we decided to develop our own, because the cut and paste in the BIM framework usually is counterproductive. You have to make sure that the various functions are tailor-made with respect to everybody's skills and competences. So my contribution was to, among others, see what elements I could pick up from the architect's side, the ones that have been consulted on this project for a 3D project, thanks to a specific software called Archicam. You don't hesitate to go into more details if you wish to. Yes, well, you can see on the slide here on the top right corner of the slide that in the course of this project we had to test all the various exchange modalities, and I think about 30% of the elements were changed. On the last DCE roundtable, we decided to keep 95%. So that's where we came to the conclusion that basically working together had enabled us to simulate the various APS phases and to improve our own version of the draft convention and to make sure that all the necessary elements were included in it, just out of our sheer trial and error method and approach, if you like. So that's what helped us to move from 30 to 90% of the intake that was going to be consensually adopted. So this is what we can truly call a collaborative work, exactly. And the second objective I'd set myself, because I happen to be working in the working groups concerning and regarding the estimation method of the cost control commission, and I had given myself another objective which consisted in classifying all the different types and categories of buildings. So that's a thing we did a first time without success, and we came to the conclusion we needed to develop an alternative method. And then, well, for most of our projects, in fact, we started off with an initial idea that turned out to be perhaps not the most appropriate one, and so we were giving ourselves a second chance, basically, to start from scratch or back up. And that was part of the classical routine that we ended up developing. Either it turned out that things weren't exploitable by the whole members of the team, or we developed a particular model, and then after a few weeks we'd realized that in practice it wasn't as operational as we thought it was going to be, basically. And that's how collaboration evolved gradually, in order to be fruitful in the eyes of everyone, with progressive amendments, and make sure that all the companies could adhere to the project of this convention. So the second objective I said was also to endorse the UNTEC method. That specific
Et dans le BIM, on a besoin de classer les choses.
And in the BIM, we've got to classify things, to organize things, and finally, we can have a great number of different nomenclature. And if there's one that can gather all sorts of players and can control that, I can talk to you about uniformat, omniclass, or things which are a little bit more English. I mean, we've got one created by Intech in the 1970s, and it has changed, and it has improved, and it fits very well the information we need to have about the building. It was meaningful for all the stakeholders of the project. We've explained it, but in fine, it was understood by all the stakeholders, all the players on the project. So another data is, as Christian said, I gave the idea of the project on which we could work because I actually worked on it in reality. I mean, I dealt with the financial part of the operation at the time when the building was built, so that's why I explored different paths, and that's why interfacing my mock-up with this method, I got a right result, and I looked into my archives, and my result was almost better than the one I gave to during the APD. So I thought, okay, then now we've reached something with very interesting tools. Just simply, I worked partly just with a trainee. I mean, we didn't do outstanding things or used outstanding resources. I mean, the not hours and hours used to recreate things. I mean, we've used the resources that we had right and left. So when we hear you, it was a very iterative approach, very experimental one too. It led you to get to new processes that could improve processes of a project that you might take on board tomorrow. Yes, I mean today on the pre-project phase, we put in place what we experimented during the BV with existing tools. Yeah, with our method, but with a collaborative approach and an iterative approach too. So I just wanted to talk to you about the open BIM, because when we started, everybody was a little looked at their own tools. Some didn't have any tools. How are we gonna exchange? We wondered, and we weren't sure what the result was. So exchanging at each phase. I mean, now here we are at the Pro DCE file. We started from the architect mock-up on the left. That's the structural part, the BET structure. So the architect used Archicad. Revit was used for the BET structure. Then the mock-up was used for IFC. Then I recuperated it in Attic, and I did my usual work. But I've got the same model as the architect had at first. So that was just to say, okay, it's an open BIM. Well, there's a debate. I mean, do we work with open BIM or native? I mean, the native approach works, but the open BIM also works. So we don't need to change all our methods to... you don't have to change all your methods and all your software to deal with BIM. I mean, you just got to think a little bit and to see how you can interface things. We start from Archicad, and then in fine, this is an IFC mock-up, which is done by my software of measurement. And we find each CCTP article as part of the IMC properties. Thank you very much, Christophe. Jacques Montel, you've got a company called Ideal, specialized in steelwork and locksmith work. So you're in based in Maubeuge, so you're a neighbor. You represent an independent company, supplier of other companies, the craftsmen, the CAPEB. You must have had a different point of view and probably had a very interesting point of view, bringing information on this virtual BIM approach. At the beginning, I mean, We knew what BIM was, we knew what it was, but as Christian said, I mean, we had never used it in actual fact. So it was an opportunity for us to to have an opportunity here. So we started from architecture drawing. That's the drawing that you see on the top right, the little lines. That's what the architect gives us to produce. We've got an architect drawing, and that's this. It's a continuation of wooden blocks like that, and there's no more information given in the specification. After that, we come up with a drawing, and we're going to validate our different hypotheses. You must have a certain height and a certain size also, so we got that validated by the architect, going through the platform, the collaborative platform, okay, rather than sending files across. I mean, we validated the calculation document by the engineering office, and then we actually worked out the software with BIM, with a true IFC file, which is going to be the true element, the true body protection element that will be actually set up. Between one is a representation, as far as the drawing is concerned, and in the last one with the IFC file, we can start production straight away of the different parts by the machine. So there's a benefit as to the productivity is concerned. And the first example was a little bit difficult. So your motivation was to work in a more collaborative part, maybe. The motivation was the progression improvement of the drawing. I mean, 2Ds, 3Ds, and then BIM. I wanted to really try that because we placed bids, but I mean, we never tried to actually use BIM, the BIM approach actually. So we integrated our body barrier in our structural mock-up, and that's where, in a structural mock-up, and that's where we can see actually all the folds that you're going to have at the end, because I mean, this body protective rail will be set up as we have on the mock-up actually. That's something that we don't have on the initial drawing. So if you had a project tomorrow to put in place, I mean, you would use new processes, and thanks to BIM in your production process for the design and the production, we've got a piece of software even for non-BIM project. We draw now with a piece of software, take a structure. But will this feedback on experience change your working methods and this collaborative approach? Well, yes. I mean, on some projects we had platforms, but they weren't as efficient as this one. But this is gradually put in place, so it's getting used more broadly. And there's going to be a bunch of our colleagues, as Christian said. We are the representatives of the sector, of the ironmonger and locksmiths. So we're going to promote the BIM, and if we can, we want to actually promote a craft BIM project. So you debriefed your colleagues. Yes, it's being done now actually. We've got 3 engineers of the ALES École des Mines working on the project for craft BIM project. So young people present here. Do you think they are aware of the BIM, are made aware of the BIM? When we presented our project to the ALES École des Mines, we didn't think that we were going to be that successful. I mean, we were in the final run with Capgemini, so we're proud of saying that actually. So I think that we often say amongst ourselves, don't claim it, but we are a bit of a lost generation, the transition generation. I mean, we've got crafts members who are not even familiar with the 3D drawings, but I mean, those coming afterwards, I mean, will be aware of that. And in the education, I mean, the BIM element is well presented. They try and do all sorts of things. There are all sorts of projects. I mean, the engineers I've met are very active in that, and they want to do things, but they trials, I mean, they're testing things. Well, Christophe, to talk about it, there's the MOOC of the InTech about the BIM to bring some more editorial and educational contents about the BIM. I would like to go back on the picture here. Doesn't want to go backwards. No. Up. Okay. So, just to add on to what Jacques just said, on the left, you've got the architect with wooden elements. I mean, he didn't do the vertical elements, so we understood that it was a specific railing. We've got the 3D architect view, giving the color of the wood here. 2D already exists because Jacques, when he suggested as a preparation phase his topic, he calculated his railing and the height, and he used that in 2D with a 3D projective picture, but it's a 2D being used. But because that's enough, I mean, there's no need to use a 3D resource to detail that. It's only when we move to the execution part, when we agree with the height, with the way the different bits would be set up, that we use the 3D. Bottom left, when we put we fixed the railing, and we didn't see that the angle with the rest of the wall there was a problem. And on the middle picture, we realized that there were no caps because the tube is comes up a little bit, extrude. So we mix 2D, 3D. We use a collaborative approach because we exchange on the platform, and we use a detailed approach. And last picture on the right, you can see that there's a view from the balcony with the iron pieces and with the verification that the elements that are going to be fixed won't go through steel. To be very clear, is in the DV they did a summary meeting. That means that the mock-up that you can see in orange is a mock-up that was done again by the company of major works. So, and then they took the object of Jacques and installed that on the maquette, on the mock-up. I think we took the collaboration element all the way to the end. After that is the manufacturing part, the production part. So I wanted for Jacques to communicate about that. It's the liking. I mean, to add on to that, it starts with wanting to do it, and it starts with the company director, because he understood that it was interesting for him, for his company, for his image and his strategy. But he also knows that he cannot do it. But I mean, he's interested in that because he can see that there's a possibility in that. So he will initiate the thinking process. He's going to take somebody to do the BIM, to deal with the BIM in his company. So in the ideal company in Tehran. Jacques is the strategic CEO, the BIM coordinator, and the person who does things. I mean, it's okay to want things. I mean, there's not just young people from school. You feel like doing it. You can see that there's a benefit in it, that you're going to produce quicker, cheaper. That's the competitive approach also. And I'm going to create an organization in my company, and I'm going to do what I need for it to work without actually knowing what to do. But I mean, so you were interested in it, you did it, you succeeded. So what is the success factor? Is it all the players of the sector, of the people working on that? I mean, a lot of people adhere to this project, and that's highly innovative. That's what makes it successful, according to you. We're very pleased with what we've done, but it's also the PTNB, it's also what we want to pass on. The difficulty we have is to transmit things. I mean, those who've done it I've gained a lot of things in doing that, and we're going to try and pass on and inform people on how to do it. So this was season 1, so there's going to be a season 2. You've completed the phase of communication. We talked about the communication to CAPEB, communication here as part of the INTEC Congress about digital economy, communication in the different sectors and professional trade unions that are part of the building sector, and then the ABV Plus, which is season 2. When is it due out? I mean, what topic will it deal with? ABV Plus, we realized that we had to focus on a key element, which was that when we deal with BIM, we have to have an objective about the BIM, and the contractor must have one. There's also the need to have a clear objective for the project. I mean, we don't start with a convention saying we're going to deal with BIM, answer in BIM, and we'll see. No, work a little bit upstream on the project, on the schedule, on the programmation demands. Work a little bit upstream of the project, because there were things going back and forth because we weren't quite used with the tool. We used the traditional method to use it in BIM, and so that means an adaptation. And we work on our own, and then we pass on the project to the other. So the collaborative is not that. I mean, you've got to know what we're going to do, what you want to receive, what you have to send out, what form should it take. So it's a definition of the program. So we are going to work on that on ABA Plus. So another element is, as far as the workshop is concerned, to focus on the time factor. For instance, here we've got to build the flooring, the wall, and then the wall covering, and then put the railing after that. So we've got to consider the time factor and then proceed to some scheduling. So when is the ABB Plus September? How long will it take? 5 months then with the workshop, and that's going to be session 3. And every time you're going to communicate, and now you're going to communicate as it's the case here, to the students for them to take ownership of this project, or they're going to have some kind of awareness. In any case, we're going to talk about MOOC. We're going to copy what the INTEC is doing it, because it's a very modern way of doing it. So that's a good solution. And then we're starting to meet the schools and the lecturers, because I mean, students must be aware of what's happening. So we're going to pay make a particular effort on schools. Christophe, I just wanted to add that for ABV Plus, I suggested for us to study the couplement part. In INTEC, we're developing a global cost software. We've got a few demonstrations here on the Congress here. We're going to experiment it and test it on the project BV Plus, to integrate it as part of the project. That's right. There's been a major interest in this workshop is that we created a lot of material. I mean, we've given you some extract, but we have created all sorts of mock-ups, we created all sorts of documents that will be able to be used as part of the different training modules. The first thing I asked for is, can I use the structure engineer mock-up to be able to integrate that in a training program that we're going to find in the Antec. Getting our hands on the mock-ups is not very easy because there are copyrights, intellectual properties. I mean, some people might not actually show that their thing was not all that right. I mean, we created lots of educational documents which are there to be used. So it's a tool that you're going to make accessible to this workshop. Yes, that can be used in a collaborative way, that can be criticized. I mean, you have a look at it and you might criticize it saying, well, I wouldn't do it this way, and we create matter. We're no longer in the virtual world because, I mean, with the BIM we are in the virtual world, and the benefit of this exploration is that even if the file was a virtual one, I mean, what is going to remain is going to be truly factual, and I hope that we're going to be able to use it in different training modules. Last question before the audience asks you some question. You're going to have to rebuild the 3 dwellings of the La Rochelle social estate with BIM. I mean, would you behave differently thanks to the BIM process now? I mean, is there an improvement in the quality, in the design and in the production and in the operational management? Well, we would have seen things that we haven't noticed when we built this building. I mean, I shouldn't tell you that, but it's true. In a BV, there were also the insurance people. The building had been built 3 years prior. I mean, buildings, sometimes there are things that are not built properly. I mean, it does happen. And there was a topic on the threshold of the patio doors, and that's something that we would have been able to clear if we'd seen that using the BIM process. I mean, there would have been a focus that would have been done on these thresholds. The BIM collaborative process with a digital approach, I mean, that's a sharing of know-how, collaborative approach, and the optimization of all the data, of the information for the benefit of the constructor and all the stakeholders. It's a benefit for everybody, basically. It's a winning situation, yes. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate for Christian, Christophe, or Jacques. We're all ears, and that might be quite interesting. A question to Christophe. When you recuperated the first mock-up, was that informed by the architect, or was it blank, and did you put the information on it? That's a debate we had, because the architect during the contest, I mean, we had given him all the elements, because 9 months to go from the contest to the production, I mean, it was a short space of time, so everybody was trying to work a little bit. So the architect sent me a wonderful mock-up. It was 120 giga, something impossible. And the first example was on a specific wall, on the bearing wall, because he used a tool. He produced his outside wall first, and then he hadn't changed his bearing walls. And then on the front there was a brick facade, but I mean the other wall was in concrete. So on the mock-up, the mock-up was informed, but and I think that you shouldn't wait a lot longer. I mean, we had a whole discussion, and we've got that as part of InTech during the BIM work group. Do we work on one mock-up? Do we work on business mock-ups? I mean, but I think that you shouldn't imagine that when we're going to get mock-ups, everything will be shipshape. I mean, and at the beginning you said that we recuperated 40%. I mean, the architect on his own sends the mock-up, and obviously the mock-up is not right. So, just one example. I mean, there's been 3 phases for us to get the name of the parts. So, might as well make sure that right from the beginning in the convention we know how we're going to name things, how we're going to control these very elements, and that's very important. How the architect controls the mock-up before sending it out. He's going to control that he's not putting an outside wall as a bearing wall. It's his responsibility. He's got to check his mock-up for us to be efficient. So it's upstream of the specification, actually. And then if that's the case, then we're going to save time. The technical control was included within the specification, but I mean, you need to be able to express your need, and we realize that the contracting authority cannot express their need very well. In ABV, I mean, the contractor will take into consideration requests that outside people might have, the technical controller, the SPs, and the and SARL, for instance, so that in his specification, well, the barrier we had to overcome is that we had to give them each a mock-up, but that's not possible. And the contractor is aware of that, or became aware that it was not possible, because if he had to pay 5 mock-ups, there's going to be a financial issue. So he thought about it, and he said, okay, what am I gonna integrate in my specification that will meet the requirements? And in ABV Plus, the contractor will end up with one single specification carrying his requirements for his program, but also that of SSBS, and the contractor will end up with just one single specification. We gave you a very short presentation here, but I mean, it's been very enriching. I mean, very, very, very nice. But what was highly interesting was that all the players played the game, really. It was a game in total transparency, and rediscovering each other activity. I mean, the companies discovered what the contractor was doing when he was dealing with his programming. I mean, that's not something that you do regularly, and so on and so forth. And then we ended up rediscovering the activity of each one, and there the collaborative approach is very important. And it's very important because, you know, all the companies, and especially the large companies, suffer from being in a silo, but your approach was totally different. I mean, you weren't in one single location, for instance, you weren't in La Rochelle, and that's the whole benefit of the digital approach, of course. I'm in Poitiers, I'm based in Poitiers. The structural engineer was in Rennes. There was Saint-Gaudin in the Pyrenees. The bricklayer was in Gap. There were Parisian companies also, but it's a collaborative approach, but it's not a collaboration between the contractor, the constructor, and the company, but everybody, it's a linear approach, and everybody participates and tries to understand the other person's point of view and issues, if there are any. So, I'm a member of NTEC, and I'm part of the task force BIM in Tech, and just to give you an element of information and a real case we're working on, where our role is to proceed to BIM management in a real project. I mean, we're not talking virtual anymore of the sizing of your project, because we've got 32 houses plus a nursery, and our role is to be able to gather the different stakeholders, the different players, stating rules of the game, convention, protocol, knowing how everybody else works. And we're in the APD Pro phase. with as an objective that the objective of the contractor to be able to gather all the information contained in the mock-up to interface that with their modeling software. So for what? Modeling software? For operation and maintenance. So today, there's not only one single solution, there are solutions. You've got to know that the tools in BIM only represent 20–25%. That's what you were saying earlier on. I mean, quite rightly. It's this human work, this relationship between people mean that these tools, we're going to be able to interface them and to get to a common result with a clear objective which is requested. Two elements that you mentioned now. The objective is the possibility to recuperate the mock-up and the full information for the management. And if that's the objective of the contractor, that's not right. We've got to start with the objective. Talking about this objective, I mean, it was part of the contest, of course, because it's a design and construction project, and in the specification there was this objective. Before taking over this project on board, we realized that the way we worked could interface itself with the modeling software of the constructor, because there's no need to have data if you keep this data for yourself. The BIM process is to pass on data, to transmit data. So we're at this phase now. All the solutions, I mean, today we're not going to debate about that. I mean, it's just the philosophy of work and this, the importance of this human relationship. We say that it's a concurrent methodology, and that's good. Talking about the contracting authority, for this person to produce the specification, he based himself on an existing specification, cut and pasted it, and then he thought, okay, I'll produce my specification, and then at the end of the day he said, no, that's not the specification of Habitat 66 that I need, 76 that I need. I need to produce my own specification with my own objectives, my own goals. So they put aside the initial specification, they clearly identified their own need, and they recreated their specification. It will be their own, it won't be anybody else's, which will enable us to meet their requirements, because there were lots of things that they were requesting us that they didn't need, and there were things that they needed that weren't mentioned in the cut and paste specification. So what's interesting in the workshop is that they took this approach, but they've also got their own professional organization, CBSH, the USH, and at the USH they said the BIM is not just a cut and paste. It's not just cutting and pasting the neighbor's specification. Think about what you need. One of the advantages of this type of work is to be able to do something, to think and say, no, that's not right, to go backwards. And that means that after that, then you know, you can explain why you got to this stage. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate. Question at the back of the room. Hi. I would have liked to know how the UNTEC manage the specificity of the BIM. How can we put the right products at the right time and avoid products that do not comply with the DUs? I mean, have you had this kind of problem? Right. In the project management, I let the project follow its path. We had a DC mock-up with 3 products with technical advice that were not named. We would have wanted for the product when you press on the button would be highlighted. So the mock-up could show lots of different things, or products who do not come under DTUs. We need to have professional people behind the machine for the professionals to indicate that. It's not the mock-up who's going to do that on its own accord. So as far as products, generic products or industrial products or products coming under technical advice or DTUs. I mean, the mock-up cannot do it on its own accord. So either it's a professional who puts a marker on the product saying, well, this product requires technical advice, or we can use checkers method to have an automatic control of the mock-up, which will check that we're not allowed to put a threshold of 3 centimeters full west in La Rochelle because the water might come in. So we can check the mock-up, but you've got to know and control the mock-up, but you've got to know what you're looking for and you've got to program it. So we've got to find out what you need and to put that in place. We put the finger on the fact that we weren't up to it in our approach, but because people were not right there. For the railing here, we realized that the slab was not at the right height, and that we were asked to increase the height of the concrete slab by a few centimeters. But when we got the validation of the 2D drawing, I mean, there was a calculation document and all the details of all the geometrical details of the railing. I mean, that wasn't done automatically. Any further questions, anyone? Don't hesitate. Final question? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Christophe. Just one slight information on the NTEC stall. I mean, you've got a part dedicated to BIM. There's Pierre, Pierre won't be here tomorrow, but I mean, it explains NTEC's work that we've done on BIM, things that we're starting to disseminate as part of this Congress. There's a presentation of the NTEC MOOCs also, and there's a first session, that took place of the presentation of the NTEC MOOC a few weeks ago. There's a second section which is going to be activated on the 14th of June, accessible for several weeks. 6 modules, 1 per week. And if you want to enroll to be on the list, I mean, there's a pre-homepage inscription. I mean, that's present on the internet if you Google it. There's a MOOC on the BIM, and that's present on the NTEC stall. That was a huge success from the students, but also from the part of the construction economists and other construction professionals. So there's a session scheduled for June, another one in September. So it's considered as a reference as far as the digital economy is concerned and the MOOC are concerned, and a reference also in the construction trade, because it contributes, first of all, to share the know-how of the BIM. That's something that we try to do with professionals from different players of the sector, and to digitalize the culture of each and every one of us, because the digitalization of the construction is something which is of a major importance that we have to make our own. Thank you.